One of the big stories that everybody's talking about this weekend is this talk by Elder Oaks. And I made this meme, A New Way to Erase the Past, and it's called A Temporary Commandment. Temporary commandments. This is just crazy. I couldn't even believe this when I was hearing about this. So let's watch this clip really quick, and it'll give you a sense of what we're going to discuss. Elder Oaks.
The Lord's commandments are of two types: permanent, like the doctrine of Christ, and temporary. Temporary commandments are those necessary for the needs of the Lord's church or the faithful in temporary circumstances, but to be set aside when the need has passed. An example of temporary commandments are the Lord's directions to the early leadership of the church to move the saints from New York to Ohio, to Missouri, to Illinois, and finally to lead the pioneer exodus to the Intermountain West. Though only temporary, when still in force, these commandments were given to be obeyed. Some permanent commandments have taken considerable time to be generally observed. For example, President Lorenzo Snow's famous sermon on the law of tithing emphasized a commandment given earlier, but not yet generally observed by church members. It needed re-emphasis in the circumstances then faced by the church and its members. Recent examples of re-emphases have also been needed because of current circumstances faced by the Latter-day Saints or the church. These include the Proclamation on the Family, issued by President Gordon B. Hinckley a generation ago, and President Russell M. Nelson's recent call for the church to be known by its revealed name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter.
Okay, let's just go through some of these. Let's pull the slide back up, because I'm telling you, this is very strange. And I think we all could kind of see what this was and what this is laying the groundwork for. So of course I had to make a meme, keep the temporary commandments. I think you can all hear that playing in your head as a former primary pianist, keep the temporary commandments, right? Let's take a minute and sing that. Is that what we sang? No, I'm sorry, it's not. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Keep the temporary commandments. So let's just kind of go through very briefly what examples President Oaks gave. So first of all, he said a temporary commandment was the Lord commanding the saints, go to New York, go to Ohio, go to Missouri, go to Illinois, go to Utah. I don't think the Lord commanded them to do that. I think it was basically, we got to get the hell out of here, right? I mean, look at the circumstances by which the saints had to leave. You've got counterfeiting, horse thievery, bank failure. You've got the Danites. You've got the Missouri War. You've got polygamy ripping the fabric of society in every town they go to. So the idea that the Lord commanded them to move from town to town was something different I had never heard. Had you guys ever heard it put that way?
No, I have not. Now, certainly, I expected him to go immediately to Noah's Ark, right?
Yeah.
Because I've heard that before. And
Yeah.
I think it was Ezra Taft Benson at some point who mentioned that in terms of, he used Noah and the ark as an example of why we listen to the living prophets and not the dead prophets.
We don't make an ark today. That's right. The
Yes.
Lord commanded Noah to, now I'm singing again, to go and build an ark. Da, da, da. I'm losing it here. But you're right. So this idea is the temporary commandment. This is the one idea that he throws out there of a temporary commandment.
And that shocked me because of Missouri.
Exactly. Because they're still making it up. So let's go on and let's talk about what some of the permanent commandments are. Tithing, okay? Well, that's a little problematic right there because of this quote that we have from Joseph F. Smith that says, we expect to see the day when we will all not have to ask you for $1 of donation for any purpose except for that which you volunteered to give of your own accord, because we will have tithes sufficient in the storehouse of the Lord to pay everything that is needed. So again, if it's a permanent commandment, Joseph F. Smith didn't get that message because he's saying we're paying tithing now, but hopefully someday we won't have to again. So my brain was kind of trying to reconcile those two things. An example of a permanent commandment of tithing. Again, a strange example, I thought, because we have proof that at least some of the prophets thought it was supposed to be something temporary.
But it is important for Elder Oaks to emphasize that tithing is a permanent
Oh,
commandment.
of course. Oh, no. For those of us that, think that might go away or it might change or it might be on a sliding scale or something. Yeah, it's not going to happen. That's the number one thing. You still got to pay. That's right. So then he went into a category which is called always been permanent, always been there, but needs a re-emphasis now. So that's kind of an interesting category. And one of the examples that he threw out was the proclamation to the family. This has always been the way it is. This has always been permanent, but now in our day, it needs to be re-emphasized and certainly not seen as something temporary. So again, I look at this, says gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. So he's saying this is not temporary. This idea is permanent with re-emphasis. But again, that reminded me of last conference and this talk by President Nelson, which Nemo has kind of gone into here. If you want to play this, very strange.
Did Russell M. Nelson just confirm a long-lost LDS doctrine that came from the days of Joseph Fielding Smith?
Your choices today will determine 3 things: where you will live throughout all eternity, the kind of body with which you will be resurrected, and those with whom you will live forever. If we unwisely choose to live telestial laws now, we are choosing to be resurrected with a telestial body.
Okay, hold up. Russell M. Nelson has just resurrected the telestial Kendall doctrine, that those who go to the telestial kingdom do not have reproductive organs. Not only is this in direct contradiction to Alma 40:23, every limb and joint shall be restored to its body, yea, even a hair of the head shall not be lost, but all things shall be restored to their proper and perfect frame. It's also just plain weird. I'm confident that this is what he was referring to when he said,
a telestial body.
But let me know what you think.
Anyway, I thought that was great because here you have the permanent commandment of the proclamation of the family. Gender is eternal. Yet just last year, President Nelson himself said those who aren't righteous here in the terrestrial kingdom will be resurrected with a body without distinguishing genitalia of gender. So I don't understand. What do you think about that?
So I'm sorry, my brain is in like 7 places. Here's the first one.
I know.
Permanent law of tithing. You pointed out one great reason for why that's a problem. Also, when is it Lorenzo Snow when he goes to St. George?
Yeah, windows of heaven.
And the exact quote is the people are obligated to pay tithing who has means.
Yep.
Also, we've done several episodes between me and RFM talking about how tithing used to be done on increase or surplus and suddenly now it's gross. Tithing hasn't been a consistent commandment, whether it was an obligation, who has means, or whether it was a certain mode in which it should be paid. And so that's a problem. Number 2, when he talks about temporary commandments, somebody pointed out perfect opportunity to mention polygamy.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that. He does this strange thing with places.
Yeah.
And then I just find knowing God has revealed that those who go to the lower 2 kingdoms will have the TK smoothie, but he allows 15 prophets, seers, and revelators over 75 years, actually more than that, about 115 years of time to be misled, thinking that people of color were less valiant and cursed in the pre-earth life when they weren't. If that's the kind of God we're dealing with, he's like, look, I'm not going to straighten out the race thing, but I've got something to tell you about this TK smoothie. This is big deal. The moment you realize what God covers and what he doesn't cover in Mormonism, what he's responsible for and what he's not responsible for, what he chose to share and what he didn't choose to share, again, Mormonism becomes absolutely absurd when you start to consider those things.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely perfect. Let's move forward. We have a couple more things that you also mentioned too, which is great. So also in the proclamation to the family, and you mentioned this, it says, let's get back to the slides. There you go. Okay. So again, it says We, the First Presidency and the Council of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, solemnly proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God and that the family is central to the Creator's plan for eternal destiny of his children. So again, like you mentioned, polygamy. He did not mention polygamy. This is a permanent commandment, a permanent with re-emphasis or not. I don't know what they're trying to say. They really didn't mention it. And I question why. I think it's because, let's see, am I out of order here? Yep, I think I'm missing a slide. I had a slide of a picture of both President Nelson and President Oaks with their 2 wives. They are technically polygamous. So strange example. The other example he brought up was permanent reemphasis was Mormon is a victory for Satan. The name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and don't forget it. And that was another thing that he said. And this just seems ridiculous. It's completely, oh, there it is. You found it. Thank you. My slides were out of order. Why didn't he mention polygamy? There you go. Yep. So again, the things that he chose to use as an example just left me completely puzzled. So the name of the church has always been permanent, but needs re-emphasis. So is this true? Is this right? So we have 1829 to 34. It was called the Church of Christ. You know this. This is in the Book of Mormon. Later, 1834, 1838, we've got the Church of the Latter-day Saints. No hyphen, no small letter. Then we've got the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 1838, and the modern format, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter hyphen small d day Saints. So that doesn't sound very permanent to me. And then I go over on the church's social media, and here they're starting to call themselves just Church of Jesus Christ. So if this is a permanent commandment with re-emphasis, there sure is a lot of wiggle room I'm finding here. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that, did you know that if you Google thechurchofjesuschrist.org, the church's website doesn't come up? That belongs to the Bickertonites. They own that URL. They have forever. This is their webpage here. They are the Church of Jesus Christ of JesusChrist.org. The LDS Church is simply churchofjesuschrist.org. They don't own the. Just like, let's see. Gosh, my slides are out of order. I'm trying to find my Strangite slide. If you can find that, Bill. The name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with no hyphen and capital D. Oh, there it is. That's right. That belongs to the Strangites right there. So again, this idea, is it a permanent commandment with re-emphasis? Is it something temporary? It just seems like there's a lot of wiggle room and they don't really know what they're saying. So I thought it was really odd. Let's see. For some reason now, oh, there we go. Okay. So I started thinking,
Were you done with that point?
No, you can make another point around it if you want. I was going to get to my...
The thing that's brought to my mind when I was going through your slides earlier before the show that had not occurred to me for some reason is that we know the history and we know that President Nelson is really, really focused on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if you say Mormon Church is a victory for Satan, because that entire name was given by the Lord in a revelation in 1838. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants. And yet, I was sort of thinking... up to this point, up to today, I was thinking, well, we hate it when the press or anybody leaves Jesus out of it and just says the Church of the Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
And I understand it because it's so dang long, but it's still kind of upsetting, right? Because that's really important. So the Church of Jesus Christ, if you leave off the of Latter-day Saints, okay, that's dispensable. We don't have to have that because we got the most important part in there, as we have in the URL, the name of the church and all these other different things. And it's referred to frequently in conference and other places. It's abbreviated to the Church of Jesus Christ without the of Latter-day Saints. Well, what occurred to me as I'm going through your slides is, let's not be hypocritical about this, okay, President Nelson? If God said the name of the church and by which it shall be called is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you have no more right to drop the of Latter-day Saints from the title than you have to drop the Jesus Christ.
Yep, no, that's exactly right. And that's what this list shows. And all of these revelations, all of these are in the scriptures, all of these were used. Now, I know they have said, there were so many churches of Christ, they had to change it. Not true. They had to change it to escape their debtors that were after the church, right? Let's just let's just have a new name. They'll never find us if we're the Church of the Latter Day. And I do like the fact that often news sources, everybody makes that mistake and they call it the Church of the Latter Day. They take Jesus right out of it. So again, to call that something permanent, there's so much evidence that it was never meant to be permanent and never was permanent in the way that they were using it. Also, the word Mormon, a victory for Satan, that's absolutely ridiculous. We have Meet the Mormons, the film that was released in 2015. And not only that, it was shown at visitor centers and other church sites all over. We have the I'm a Mormon campaign. These are in recent history. These are in the last 10 years or so. So the idea that it's been permanent, if it was permanent, then all of these campaigns are against God's wishes and will. So it's very confusing.
Can I bring up another point?
Yeah, please do.
President Nelson is unique among prophets in the LDS tradition, as far as I know, in teaching us with clarity that prior prophets can be so easily deceived by Satan.
Yeah, that's it. He's thrown every prophet under the bus for this. So
if President Hinckley can be so easily deceived by Satan,
Yep.
why is President Nelson immune?
Yep, that's exactly right. So, and we can kind of joke about this or see how absurd it is, but I think there's a higher purpose for this idea of temporary commandments. And in talking to different people, I came up with this list where, number one, a temporary commandment is for a certain era and certain people. So you don't really need to explain it. Why in my era did I have to take out one of my piercings in my ear? We can't tell you why. That's what God wanted for you, especially during that era. And it was not for you to question. You only needed to have one earring. Why does somebody today get to have two? Not for you to ask. That was a temporary commandment for you and your age. It's a way to sweep it under the carpet. Another thought is a temporary commandment can't be judged by present context. That was then. That's the same kind of thing. We can understand why the priesthood ban, right? A different age, a different day. It was temporary. It was fixed. It's fine. What's wrong with that, right? So easy to explain it all away. Also, a temporary commandment encourages one to hold on longer, even if something seems reprehensible. And I think about my co-host on Mormonish, Landon, who was very upset about November 15th. He was very upset about the 2015 policy, and he was starting to gravitate out of the church, but he was still in. And he went to his bishop and had like a several hour-long conversation about that policy. And the bishop defended it. I know it's hard to understand, but this is what God wants. This is it. This is that. 3 days later, that was a Sunday, Wednesday, it was overturned and everything's just fine, right? Just hold on a little longer. If you don't understand something or don't like it, chances are it'll change. Maybe it was a temporary commandment. So I see it as a way to make people gaslight themselves into staying in the boat a little bit longer. Another idea I had is a temporary commandment allows the church to blame God, right? Not the leaders. And again, that's like the priesthood ban. President Oaks at the B1 celebration. We don't know why. We don't know why it was God. It was temporary. And then he lifted it. Isn't that great? I mean, to me, Mormon God is like Zeus, just playing with people, right? Ooh, I'm going to zap you with lightning. Ooh, I'm going to get you. Oh, I'm going to tease you here. I'm going to give you this policy. I'm going to take away one of your earrings. Oh, I'm going to do all that. Isn't this fun? It's no way to live your life with that kind of a higher power in your life. And lastly, a temporary commandment, let's see, can I read that? Oh, allows the church to pivot quickly with little explanation. Now that could be a good thing. Maybe they'll make some changes that we're all like, oh my gosh, I never thought that would happen. But not necessarily. So any final thoughts on temporary commandments before we move on from this segment? I just thought this was fascinating. Whoever's coming up with this, brilliant. I have to say, brilliant.
I sort of understand part of it. Like, again, I don't believe there was a Nephi and he was literally commanded to cut off Laban's head. But in Mormonism, you have these moments where there's an exception to the rule or we have to do something different. And you can even pick apart like Jesus's time where for someone to be healed, they have to cover themselves in ash or sackcloth or whatever. Like there might be a specific rule for a specific person at a specific time. That can sort of make sense to me. But and he doesn't use temporary commandments sort of to justify all of these things. But it seems like this move that will allow future generations to use it this way. And for anybody who's a believer or an apologist out there who says that's not the way he used it, you guys are making more out of this than what's there. Maybe let's just wait and see if this is a form of rhetoric that's used at the local or general level in order to excuse mistakes from the past and to justify, like, oh, well, like you pointed out, Rebecca, there was a time and a place for that. It's just not today.
Yeah. For no reason, completely
Yeah.
arbitrary.
And apparently, any commandments that we have today, which we think are permanent, are subject to being revised to temporary on a whim.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. Which some
Yeah.
things are good, like you said. I don't think he means it that way.
Yeah.
I think he's meaning the things he's not talking about. I think he means polygamy, which is obviously a classic example of a temporary commandment. Or is it? Because here's a guy who's married to a second eternal wife, Kristen. And I guess he'd have to explain to her if he put polygamy on the list of temporary commandments, as well as other people. And the obvious one, which came to me as you were speaking, which is the priesthood and temple ban from 1852 to 1978. Obviously temporary. And we know he thinks it's a commandment because we know he thinks it's from God because he said so in that B1 celebration back in 2018.
Except what the audience wouldn't know in such a story, well, our audience would, but a general audience, is that Brigham Young, by his prophecy, essentially said it's a permanent commandment until the very end of the plan of salvation, working itself out past the millennium until we get to the very end. And every spirit child of God that's Caucasian gets the access to these things. Then and only then can these folks get it. So like polygamy, celestial marriage was required. We showed that. Like the priesthood and temple ban, where Brigham Young says, sorry about your luck, but this is permanent. All of these things are sort of able to be massaged in the modern day so that the modern day member doesn't have a clue that in the past these things were taught completely the opposite of the way that you're taught the idea today.
Yeah. And it also gives the modern member a way when somebody says, look, it wasn't that way when I was growing up. I wasn't taught that. This was very different. They can say, well, that was a temporary commandment. Just kind of dismiss whatever your point of view might be. It's a really good tool, I think. So, and of course, we can't forget this quote where it says, this is Elder Tom Perry, the world changes constantly and dramatically, but God, his commandments and promised blessings do not change. They are immutable and unchanging. That was a temporary statement.
Until they're not.
Yep. That's it. We don't know.